Good afternoon, Bill. Thanks for joining me on my Zoom call today. This will ultimately be part of my video blog, or as the millennials say, a vlog. Actually, blogging might even be too old for them. I don't know anymore. Um, so for all my viewers today, I just wanted to let them know that my guest is a chap named Bill Efford, and I've known Bill for many years. We were colleagues at the office of the fire marshal, and we've stayed in touch for a long time. And Bill retired when, Bill? What year do you remember?
I retired in 2003. I left the office 2003 at the age of 58.
So early, like me. I'm 58. I'm going to
Are you?
retire. So 2003. Has it really been that long? I mean, I'm having a hard enough time believing it's July.
You know what? I think life is like a roll of toilet paper. The closer you get to the end, the faster it goes.
I think you're probably correct. So Bill's sense of humor is probably for anybody watching will come right through. Uh, Bill and I used to be on the road together frequently doing stuff for the office of the fire marshal, and we would and sometimes we'd have to drive like 4 or 5 hours just to get to one meeting, and we would get in the car and we would laugh from the minute we got in to the minute we got out, and
We certainly did.
it was sometimes it was pretty raucous, but anyways.
Yes.
So I've picked on Bill today for a number of reasons. So I asked you to talk, A, because you're retired, and B, you, when we worked together, you were probably one of the most interesting people I ever worked with. And I knew when you retired, you'd only get more interesting. And that's kind of why today I picked the title, The Very Last Renaissance Man, because you're one of those people who had a wide range of knowledge and skills in a very broad range of activities and interests.
Yeah.
So when we worked for the fire marshal's office, you're very, very knowledgeable in code and things that related to the engineering of and safety of buildings. So you had all of that background. And while we were doing that, you had an interest in the outdoors and nature and travel. And you're the only person I know who's ever built his own canoe, but built it in such a way that you could break it in half and put it in your trailer when you went
Yes.
on the road.
Yeah.
So, you had woodworking and you had a creative nature. And you
Yeah.
were always really good at that. And so away you went in 2003.
Yes.
And
Well, I actually built a sailboat too. In
oh,
addition to the two-piece boat that came apart, that was boat number two. The first boat was a 16-foot racing sailboat. And I taught myself to sail out of a book and then built the boat and took it down to Lake Ontario and then went from there. I just learned the actual skill there. And then later I built the two-piece boat so we could take it apart, nest it together in a van and take off to the States with it. And then sold that and got a third boat and set up a self-steering gear. And Vicky and I used to sail across from our side of the Lake Ontario to the US side. And we could sit there with a drink in hand and the tiller would move automatically. So
wow.
we had lots of fun.
Yeah. So thank you for proving my point. That's awesome. So you retired and you traveled around a bit. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you today is about that creative side, because you're now a published author of multiple books. I think you've picked up an instrument again after I don't know how many years, and you sing at local events.
Yep.
So you've kind of taken your retirement and gone full bore on your creative side.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, good
Yeah.
for you. So let's talk about the books today, because
Sure.
some of them are pretty darn interesting. Um, and you're researching a couple, and you're self-published. So I think that would be interesting to a lot of people too, being self-published, going about writing the books, where they can find your books.
Yep.
The Picaroon's a little spicy. I
Yes.
I thought, Bill writes smut. Okay, good. Yay. All right. So what was the first book? Tell me about the first book.
The first book was Picaroon, and it's the story of a self-employed guy in New York City. His wife has divorced him. He's lost his kids in the divorce, and he's just getting tired of the 9-to-5 hamster wheel. So he basically chucks in his job. He outfits a seaworthy sailboat, and plans a trip to Sydney, Australia from New York. But what he does is he doesn't take the easy route through the Panama Canal. He goes right down to the tip of South America at Cape Horn and makes the most dangerous crossing you can from the Atlantic to the Pacific Oceans at the bottom of South America. Along the road, he's a quiet sort of a guy, and both the characters are different in the book. He meets, when he goes to Rio de Janeiro, he meets Kate Devonshire, who's an expat Australian, and she's working at a bar. She's totally different than Andrew Kincaid, the protagonist. So they meet and sort of fall in love. And they're, as I say, they're very both opposite people, but what they're both carrying is damage from their early lives. But anyway, the story unfolds. He leaves Rio, goes around the bottom of South America. She is just so wrecked because he's left. She flies over to Valparaiso, Chile, and meets him there. And they eventually reconnect, and they sail together across the Pacific from Valparaiso, Chile, to the Galapagos Islands, to the Marquesas, and then eventually make landfall in Australia. And I wrote the book. I was careful not to have too much sailing jargon because I wanted people who weren't sailors to, get the book. So there's a lot of mixture of things going on. He's communicating with radio telephone to his kids. He's stopping off at various ports. He's meeting different people. So it's kind of it's an interesting journey in a sense.
Okay. So let me ask you this. I hear all kinds of cool stuff going on in there. So was it the research about what goes into sailing all those ways that interested you, or was it the relationships that what did you want to develop, and what came first, the research and the ideas, or the characters and then you backfilled the other way?
Yes, the research came first. It took me a full year. I knew generally the plot outline, but it took me an entire year to research this. I wanted the last detail in there for the reader. So it took me a whole year. I had to research ocean currents, wind patterns of the world. I plotted the whole trip out on a world map. And so I knew where the boat was at any given time. Any references that were made to sea creatures had to be accurate. If a sea creature was migrating, it had to be at a certain time in a certain hemisphere. So there was an enormous amount of detail. I went on Google Earth. I researched every harbor where they came into. Some had to be taken, so you had to come into some at high tide because there was a reef at the harbor entrance, all this kind of stuff. So it took me a year to do that. And I had hundreds of photos and videos that I downloaded so that I could accurately write. I think the biggest thrill I got when the book was done was I got letters from people, different parts of the world. I met people who had traveled to some of the places that I had researched, and they assumed that I had been there.
Wow.
So that gave me a lot of satisfaction that I had given people. One person said, he says, I felt like I was actually on the boat.
Wow, good for you. Okay, so this brings me to something, because I hear you, I'm looking at your expression and I'm hearing you talking about all of this research.
Mhm.
And last week I did a blog post on Jill Haynorth, and
Mhm.
she is a renowned underwater cave diver photographer. She's been in caves all over the world. Uh, James Cameron said more people have set foot on the moon than to the places Jill Haynorth has been. All right. And I just found all of this fascinating, and her research and different things.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating. And I made a comment in a post that, I'm living vicariously through Jill Haynorth. And I got somebody who wrote me back, who gave me, well, you know how well I take somebody giving me a hard time. So let's just say they got a little vocal and they got slapped back. But their gist of their comment was, I was wasting my retirement by living vicariously. And I thought, what an interesting comment, because I was I never want to be underwater in a cave a kilometer and a half in. No thanks, not me. But I thoroughly enjoyed researching what she was doing and trying to understand the concept she was putting forward. So that's kind of what I actually hear you saying. You seem to really enjoy and you got pleasure and joy out of doing the research for this book. Is that a fair
Absolutely.
statement?
Absolutely. And it went beyond the actual sailing aspect. Kate Devonshire was an expat Australian. She had left Australia for reasons that are made known in the book. But I even downloaded a dictionary of Australian slang so that when she speaks, she speaks authentically. And that was important to me. I got a lot of praise for the publisher for the accuracy of dialects in my books and speech. And Kate, I wanted to make Kate authentic. And
okay, so I get that. So I appreciate that, because I thought the book was good and I liked all those things. But I could tell, knowing you like I do, that the research was detailed and in depth. And unless you really enjoy research and learning, nobody's going to put that level of attention to detail. And that to, and I guess that's where I was going with that, because I enjoy learning all that stuff.
Yes.
And I don't find, as this person said, I'm subsuming. I mean, wow, okay. I'm subsuming my desires through somebody else. I'm actually getting pleasure out of the research. And it sounds like you got great pleasure out of the research. Now you've sailed, but you haven't done that route.
Correct.
Okay. Is that something that you want to do, or?
Yeah, I fantasized once upon a time when I was sailing and really into it, of doing something like that. It never came to pass, but still in all, the research, as far as research goes, even with a novel, I think if you're a good writer, you owe it to your readers to give them the very best that you can. Craft a good story, create like believable characters. But I think if you're going to give your readers the best experience, I think you owe it to them to bring in factual information that helps to sort of cradle the story as they go through.
Right. Well, that's interesting, because I use the term Renaissance man, or the very last one, and we all think of Leonardo da Vinci as the original Renaissance man, but the term was actually coined by Battista Alberti in around the same time. He was the one that came up with it. Uno universal, universal man. And the concept was that a Renaissance man or universal man strives to learn more and always expand their craft and do the very, very best at what they're doing, to master it. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, or your approach to the book.
Yes.
Yeah. So
my approach with all three books.
Yes. And the way you built the boats, and the way you do the other thing. So there is a fit there. Okay, so that was the first book. Tell me about the second book.
Well, the second book is about Howard Monroe, who is a college professor in Ohio. He loses his wife in a drowning accident, and he wants to start his life over again. So he advertises, and he gets a teaching position in California. And so he packs it in at his college, and he's an RVer. Now, Vicki and I have RV'd all 48 states, so some of that came out of my own
life experience.
Yeah. And so he heads for the West Coast, and he picks up a hitchhiker, Miriam Kovacs, and she they're very different. He's highly educated. She is a high school dropout. She's pregnant. She's been through some failed relationships. She is heading to California as well. She's heading to Malibu. He's heading to San Diego. But she has a rich mother living in Malibu. She wants to have an abortion. That's at least her intent at the beginning. So the two of them, very different. And what I wanted to show in this particular book was how people from diverse backgrounds, here he is, highly educated man, here's a gal that's a high school dropout, yet each of them gives something to the other and over the course of this journey. They each learn something from each other, and they grow as people. He heals and she grows learning from him, and it's kind of a a back and forth thing. And that was the purpose of that book there, to show how people from very diverse backgrounds can still contribute something to each other.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I don't think I haven't read that one, but I have read Picaroon. Now the third book is done or almost done?
The third book is done, and I was ready to this time approach a Canadian publisher, a mainline publishing house.
Right.
However, COVID came along and they stopped taking manuscripts, but I watched their website fairly regularly to see if they are taking manuscripts.
Right.
And as soon as they are, bang, out it goes. It's ready.
Okay. So let me ask you this then, before we move on to the Canadian. Your first two books are self-published.
Yes.
Is that the correct term, self-published?
Yes, Universe Publishing published them, and they can be gotten off of they can be ordered off of Amazon. There's reviews for both of those books as well.
Okay, but I have, more than, I like to joke that I have at least 7 followers, all my children, my husband occasionally, and one paid acquaintance. But I actually have more followers than that. And I know a lot of people are interested in writing and writing books. Like, I write a blog, so I like to write, but there are people out there very interested in publishing a book. So could you not tell us your process? I mean, not about the research about the book, but could you give somebody who's watching this, who has an inkling that they'd really like to publish a book, how to go about that?
Yes. I think it helps if you've been an avid reader. The more you read, especially novels, the more you get a sense for character development. I basically started out with an idea and then built. One of the things that I do is I make a card for each character, and every single thing about that character is on this card or series of cards.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of personality do they have? Are they argumentative? How do they interact with other people? Are they educated? Are they not educated? A whole host of things. And so those characters are right in here. So as I write dialogue, the dialogue has to be appropriate for the way that person interacts with other people. So I think if you're going to write a novel, you need to think about that. Describe your characters not only physically, but in a whole host of other areas. So you've nailed that down. Build a story that brings the reader into the book. There's a theory called first sentence, first paragraph, first page. If you follow that, you have basically reached out to the reader and pulled them into your book.
Okay.
And then as you move through the story, which you should have mapped out, and sometimes that changes as you go, but generally you have a storyline, and you need at the end of each chapter to entice the reader to move to the next chapter and the next chapter. And of course, skill at writing certainly helps, grammar, this type of thing, but there's a lot of good tools that help now. A word processor is just absolutely marvelous to work with because you can move stuff around, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, pay a lot of attention to your storyline. You want your characters to be real for the reader, to give something to the reader. And I think that's the key. And I think, and then, once you get the thing developed, be ruthless, edit your work, run it by other people. I'm blessed. I have a wonderfully creative wife. She has helped me with all 3 of these books, and I will run an idea. What do you think, Vicki? Does this work? Yes or no? And so sounding boards with other creative people that you know, whether they're in family or not, is also a really good help. And so those would be some basics. And there's good books. Actually, you can go to, I've got books here. One of the great books for anybody thinking of writing is the Chicago Manual of Style. It's referred to just as Chicago, but publishers, editors, and writers can use this, and it gives the protocols of how to use language and how to describe things. It's a great resource. And of course, a dictionary thesaurus, but there's books on how to develop characters for novels. You can find them.
Right. And there's great master classes online.
Yep.
Right. You know, you could write a book, you could take a master class with
Yep.
everybody from David Baldacci to Margaret Atwood.
Yep.
And so that's really good. But so you've done all of this, you've got it written, you've got a working draft.
Yep.
But you want to publish it yourself. So then what do you do? What does somebody do next? The mechanics of it. Because I think you're, and you know, the building of things. I go back to structure and Da Vinci and you know, the structure and form. So I'm not surprised you're completely master at that. But what's the next piece? Like, do you actually have to pick you have to find a self-publisher, or
yes, well, there's a number of them out there. I did a lot of research to try to find a publisher that was affordable. But the first thing I did, what I wanted to do with Picaroon, I paid probably the premium. There's different levels you can get into. If you want to just publish something for family and you have a dozen or a dozen books, that's one level you get into. Then there's other levels. I got into the top level. I had to pay more. But the reason that I did it was I wanted my novel to be put in front of an editorial board and picked apart. I wanted to find out from professional publishers, was I hitting the mark? And so I paid extra for that. And they reviewed all aspects of the novel and gave me feedback, which was just invaluable. But the thing that with me is I'm a ruthless editor of my own work. So before they even got a draft, I had probably gone over that 20, 30 times, looking for all kinds of stuff. But I got great feedback and it was worth the money. So I went back with iUniverse Publishing the second time for In From the Rain. I learned so much from Picaroon. I didn't need to go to the upper level with the second one. But there's various ones out there, self-publisher. It does cost you money to initially get it done. And then they will give you X number of, you order X number of books, and then it's your job to distribute it. So the work of putting a novel together, it's only the tip of the iceberg getting the book finished, because now you got to market it. And this is a whole other ball game. And I did send it around to a number of people. I got a lot of copies, and then electronic copies were made of the book. I started getting letters from people that had read it. So it sort of went from there. On this time with Northern River, I want to go to a Canadian publisher this time and a mainline publisher. I think my skill, I was told I was in the top 10% of professional writers when I finished Picaroon. So I took that as some encouragement. But my goal for Northern River is I want to get this into a mainline publisher. And you remember Ross Taylor on our job?
I do.
Kathy is an avid reader and went to a writer's seminar in the St. Catharines area and put me onto a publisher that this author that she knew had gone, and that's the House of Anansi Press. They're, I think, associated with the University of Toronto Press. So that's what I'm shooting for now. I want to go to a mainline publisher that can maybe help to distribute the book. It's been 9 years in the making. It's probably the most controversial of the 3 novels that I've read. It deals a lot with 2 characters which are gay in the book, one of which was raised in an extremely religious household. When she comes out to her parents, she loses the relationship with her parents. So there's all kinds of this book took enormous research. I was very lucky. I found something online. Well, this all started with the suicide of a young boy in the Ottawa area, Jamie Hubley, in 2011. He was bullied throughout his school years, right up into high school, eventually took his life. And it just really hit me that this boy's 15 years old, his whole life's ahead of him, and look what's happened. So I started researching attitudes about homosexuality, and what do I find? I get online and I find a paper called Two-Spirited People and Social Work Practice, Exploring the History of Aboriginal Gender and Sexual Diversity. It was written by Jill Allers. She is a gay, or they call them two spirits. She's a two-spirit, a gay woman. She's a social worker in Saskatoon. I got a hold of her and I said, I want to write this story. I gave her the plot outline. And I said, would it be possible for a Caucasian woman, a member of the dominant culture, to get a romantic relationship with an Indigenous person? And she was very kind. She communicated with me and she said, if Laura Baker was prepared to not only learn about, but live aspects of Aboriginal culture, absorb the values, bring them into her life, yes, there's a very high possibility. So in the book, Laura does this. She actually learns to speak Cree, and then she's taken under the wing of the elders who teach her about things in her partner's culture. Her partner is Cecile Fleury, and she learns about Aboriginal culture, and that before the colonizers ever set foot in North America, Aboriginal people, there was no such thing as homophobia. It's hard to imagine. And here we had colonizers come to North America with the goal of exterminating a culture. We've seen a genocide. We're seeing it now with the school system, residential schools. And there was this was a planned genocide of the culture. Destroy their language, change their appearance, assimilate them, make them white like us. And nobody, listen, I guess one of the things that I really blew me away was learning about how Aboriginal people get together to discuss things. They get in a circle. They have either an eagle feather or an object that they pass around, and only the person that holds that can speak. Everybody else has to hold their tongue, wait their turn to speak. So if you contrast that with the lunacy that you see in the House of Commons, with somebody trying to make a point and a whole bunch of people yapping in the background.
Or throwing a shoe.
I mean, if they served food in there, what would they be doing? Having a food fight? I mean, it's disgraceful. I wouldn't even want to take my grandkids to see a spectacle like that. And so here we are, the colonizers come and they don't learn a damn thing from these people. Oddly enough, in the States, the House of Representatives, they learn, because if you have ever seen a session of Congress, the speaker will say, the member from South Dakota, you have 8 minutes. And they have 8 minutes of uninterrupted time. Nobody is allowed to speak. But I mean, look at the lunacy that goes on in our House of Commons. So what did we learn from these people? I mean, it just blew me away. The more I research for this book, I'm seeing a beautiful culture. You could raise a child anywhere with the values of Indigenous culture, and you'd be turning out a decent human being. And we never listen to these people.
So I see that the total passion come through in your face. So how close is this next book? It's ready to be sent to a Canadian publisher, and so that's the next step, seeing if they will publish.
Yeah.
Well, okay, that sounds fascinating, and that sounds like it's going to be a great book and very well timed. Now, I also know that you probably have a fourth book on the go.
Yes.
But it might be the fourth book on the go, but it's also the longest book on the go, is it not?
Yeah, it started in 1981. My wife and I found, Vicki and I found an antique trunk in a downtown Toronto secondhand shop. And there was a name on the trunk, Captain P.H. Ray, Fort Egbert, Alaska. So we brought the trunk home and we restored it, but I got curious. So I wanted to find out about this trunk. Well, it was a project that took on a life of its own. I researched for almost 25 years of this. Vicki and I actually traveled across America, retracing places where this guy had been. He was an interesting character. When I found this trunk, I was in the Fire Prevention Bureau in Etobicoke, and around the corner was Gordon Sinclair, and I knew that I found out that in the book Klondike by Pierre Burton,
Yep.
he writes a certain amount about Ray. So I went to talk to Gordon Sinclair, knocked on his door, give him the overview of what I was doing. Oh, he says, I'll have Pierre call you. So very graciously, Pierre Burton called our house. I must have been on an hour and a half at least with him on the phone. Fascinating man.
Yeah.
And he said, Bill, he says, there is so much about this man. He says, I encourage you to go forward and write an entire book about this man, because he says, I only took a little tiny bit of his involvement in the Klondike Gold Rush. But he says, this guy has done a pile of things. And over the period of time, Vicki and I jumped in the car. We headed down to Washington, D.C. We went into the National Archives. I actually was handling documents that this guy had touched. So it was very, very powerful for me. And so I kept learning more and more. And as we traveled, I was out in Wyoming. I found out from some people in a historical society that they were about to lynch this guy. He became an Indian agent at one point. And he said to white ranchers, he says, you can't graze your cattle on that land. That belongs to Native people. And they apparently were almost ready to lynch him. The US Army had to actually get him out of town because they were threatening to kill him. So I learned all kinds of stuff about this guy. And he followed the railroad out when they opened up the railroad to the west. He dealt with Custer before the infamous Last Stand. And I was told there was only one picture of him that I found at the National Archives. I have three. They're in the office. If you look over my shoulder, you'll see one of them. You'll see a couple of them up there. And I got 4 pictures of his. And he, what I found was odd. We were born almost a century apart. 1842 for him, 1845 for me. We both were twice married, once to a native person of our own country, once to a foreigner. Yep. We both spent our lives in uniform. We both got our major promotions at the age of 39. It was, it was getting spooky almost.
Yeah, numerology.
It was yeah. So that book, I was exhausted. It's 75% done. And then to take a break, I started writing novels.
So that book that's almost 75% done, it's a biography.
Yes.
It's a biography. And I think it's interesting where you find your, where the kernel comes from. This book, the kernel is from a trunk. The other book is a tragic event of school bullying and homophobia.
Yeah.
And, then you research, fascinating pieces. So I think that I love where you get your kernels from, and you're jumping off and your springboards. I think that's awesome.
Well, so, I learn a lot in the process of writing. I think this is one of the most exciting things. I'm not just crafting a story for a reader. I'm learning myself. I'm educating myself as I go along. The research just enriches you as you go. And it's certainly all 3 books, but especially Northern River, that opened my eyes. So, currently, as you know, we're seeing the issues with the residential schools, the graveyards and stuff. And I write about that in Northern River, and I write about what's happened to Laura's partner's culture.
Right. And I think I can. So let me ask you this then. So, and the research and all of that to grow, again, links back to the Renaissance, but the book about Northern River and all of the research. So a lot of your other books, so you did all the research on the sailing, and you learned about the sailing to add the details, but that became just part of the font of the knowledge that Bill knows, but it didn't appear to make the same emotion. You got enjoyment out of it, but it didn't
Mhm.
have the same emotional impact. The
Oh, yeah.
book Northern River, the research has done more than just become an accumulation of knowledge. It has changed. You've always been open-minded, but
Yep.
the appreciation for the culture and the devastation that has been heaped upon the First Nations.
Absolutely soul destroying. I've been in and seen the United Nations definition of crimes against humanity. I would encourage anybody to go and visit that and then ask themselves, do they not see a parallel here?
Right.
Here's something that interesting that happened to me while I was writing Northern River. A couple of years ago, I got very, very sick. I have COPD. When I get a cold, which is rarely, I'm really on the ropes badly. So a couple of years ago, I got really sick, but I was writing Northern River and I was into the healing plants and stuff like that. So out of desperation, I couldn't get rid of this and I was really getting quite sick. I went and harvested some cedar, which is one of the medicine plants from my backyard, chopped it up, put it in a bowl, put boiling water over it, and then put my head over it with a towel so I could inhale it. Then I took a couple of fistfuls of white pine needles, made a tea out of it. I found out that there's 5 times the vitamin C in an orange.
Yep.
And within the following day after I did this, it was like, I was just blown away at the difference that it made. And I had used native medicine plants.
Yep. Well, that's interesting because I did a great walking tour with a woman named Karen Stevenson, and I did a blog about that. And we walked the property to see what we could forage, because Tustin said, "Hey, are these morels?" But he asked me after he'd already mowed them all down.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things Karen talked about, working as part of her learning and being a certified herbalist and all those things. The value of indigenous medicine and indigenous healing, and that's why the pine trees and the pine needles were used on the ships, because it prevented scurvy. And you're exactly right, because of the vitamin C. So there's plenty to be learned everywhere. So
And Cynthia,
yeah.
here's the hideous part. You're probably familiar with the 60s scoop, where Aboriginal kids were taken from their parents. This is different.
Not that phrase. No, I'm not familiar with that phrase.
The 60s scoop, Aboriginal children were taken away from their parents and they were farmed out to foster homes. Some of them were sold for $5,000 to $10,000 to American people who wanted to adopt. And the argument that was made was, you people aren't fit to raise children. You feed your children on berries and roots and off the land, and you're not fit to have kids, so we're taking your kids from you. They've been raising kids, for God's sakes, here since they crossed the Bering Strait. For thousands of years they've been raising children successfully and with a wonderful value system, and they were just
Taken.
Yeah.
Taken. So all of that's in this next book. So I'm very hopeful that the Canadian publisher will jump on it like a fat kid on a Smartie. And I think that would be awesome. So let's just take a sidestep here for a second, because the writing's not all you do. So you've picked up an instrument. What else have you been doing to fill your time? And we're going to end here in a couple minutes, but you've done the traveling?
Oh yeah, all 48 states and every province but BC and Newfie.
Okay. And what is there anything else on the agenda, or just more books?
Well, I think I have the book on Ray to finish. Once I can get Northern River launched, what we're looking forward to now, I've been entertaining for the last 8 years in town, open mics and different things, and I play all kinds of music from Vera Lynn, 1940s, through to you name it. I got about 300 tunes, and of course, COVID has shut all that down. So we're really missing entertaining. We have a lodge, a retirement lodge that we go to, and these people became like family. we used to drink with them at the bar after we'd entertained, and we still stay in touch with some of these folks. So we're just waiting, like everybody else is, for life to get back to normal.
Well, I'm not sure.
Crazy day.
I think it's going to be a new normal, but we'll have to wait and see.
I
But
think so.
okay, so I'm going to end here. So I want to let everybody know that the two books, Picaroon and Out of the Rain, are available on Amazon,
Mhm.
and I will leave a link at the bottom of my blog.
Okay.
They can watch for the next.
Northern River.
They can watch for Northern River, and when it comes out, I will post something for you.
Great.
And have you got any? So nothing is scheduled where somebody can come and hear the band play.
What
Yeah,
for music?
there's no bookings for you, Mick, and the boys just yet.
Not yet. Not yet. No.
Not yet.
But I enjoy it. I play fingerstyle, which a lot of people don't play anymore. And that opens up massive. I do all kinds of folk stuff out of the 60s.
Yeah.
When so many of us were all smoking weed and all the rest of it.
Speak for yourself there, Buster. I was in kindergarten.
Now I take it medicinally. I take CBD oil now.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. Okay. So, all right, that could be a whole other blog about people and what they do medicinally, but we'll leave that there. All right. I want to thank you for spending the last little while with me. I think this has been great. You were interesting to work with before. We used to have we had a really good time working together. I loved being on the road with you. It was just a highlight. And
yeah, same here. I felt the same.
I knew you'd get better with age. I just knew it.
You have an outrageous sense of humor, which is fairly rare. So I had a lot of scope there.
Yeah, there's a wide range of topics we covered on the road. Pretty much anything was fair game. But anybody who doesn't know anything about the fire marshal's office, we advise fire departments from Lake Ontario to James Bay, from Manitoba to Quebec. So when we were on the road, we were on the road.
Yeah.
So,
and some of the most incredible people in all my 38 years in public safety, the 17 years I spent in the fire marshal's office was just absolutely top drawer. They're some of the most incredibly interesting people, knowledgeable people, and you felt like you're really a part of an incredible team there. I look back with very fond memories.
Yeah, me too. And I keep in touch with a lot of them. All right. So thank you very much. I'm going to hit end. I'm going to hit end record.
Okay.